A chain reaction car crash on the highway. With steel bars, oil tankers, and debris flying in all directions, this fiery chaos marks the prelude to death. In that terrifying moment of foresight, Kimberly sees a vivid vision of the apocalypse as time freezes a second before disaster strikes. But survival is an illusion. Those who escape the initial disaster find themselves hunted down one by an invisible force of fate. In the horror movie universe, Final Destination 2, 2003, is widely regarded as a model sequel. However, it's more than just a blood-soaked spectacle. It's a hidden philosophical experiment about humanity's futile resistance to fate. Director David R. Ellis uses techniques beyond traditional horror storytelling, immersing the audience in a deadly game where the rules of fate are challenged. But the ultimate question remains, if the rules of death are broken, can one truly escape? Unraveling the deeper layers. What's even more thought-provoking is how Final Destination 2 builds upon the core idea of the original film. Fate is inescapable, while planting an intriguing narrative seed. Why does the order of death reverse in relation to the survivor's past? Is this concept a reflection of the filmmaker's challenge to the logic of causality? Or does it conceal a deeper religious metaphor? As we explore further, we will uncover the untold creative secrets behind this sequel. In 2000, Final Destination shocked audiences with its concept of escaping death only to face its wrath later. But Final Destination 2 not only escalates the gore and terror, but also boldly experiments with narrative logic and philosophical depth. Screenwriters J. Mackie Gruber and Eric Bress, influenced by existentialists Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche, attempt to explore the ultimate question. Do humans have the power to alter their predetermined fate? The butterfly effect and chaos theory. The concept of reverse death order in the film visually represents the ideas of the butterfly effect and chaos theory. If a minor detail is altered, can the trajectory of fate be rewritten? The true horror, however, lies in the realization that no matter what changes occur, death always awaits ahead. Director David R. Ellis, with a background in Hollywood stunt work, having contributed to Lethal Weapon and The Matrix, brought a more intense action concept to Final Destination 2. He meticulously designed each death as a chain reaction, immersing the audience in the chaos of the highway, making them feel the crushing inevitability of fate. Ellis masterfully blends physical logic with sensory stimulation, creating deaths that resemble a domino effect. Once the first piece falls, the gears of fate can no longer be stopped. The iconic highway crash. The most iconic scene in the film, the highway chain reaction crash, was almost cut from the final version. Initially, the script depicted a much simpler disaster, but Ellis knew that audiences expected far more. He insisted on adding elements like flying logs, an out-of-control oil tanker, and multiple explosions, transforming the premonition into one of the most unforgettable disaster scenes in film history. According to the effects team, the scene involved real vehicles and months of post-production fine-tuning. The result? A visually stunning sequence that became the most iconic death premonition of the entire series. Alternate ending, a twist of hope or despair. Interestingly, the original ending of Final Destination 2 was vastly different from what audiences ultimately saw. In the original script, Kimberly and Burke did not survive. Their attempt to save Eugene ended in failure, emphasizing a bleak, nihilistic conclusion where no one escapes death. However, producer Craig Perry felt that this ending was too despairing and could leave audiences feeling overly disheartened. As a result, a more hopeful version was filmed, one where Kimberly and Burke appear to break the chain of death, only for the barbecue explosion to reveal that fate never lets rule breakers off the hook. Casting A.J. Cook, a choice for emotional depth. A.J. Cook, who portrayed the protagonist Kimberly Corman, was not the director's first choice. Initially, producers leaned toward selecting an actress with a more traditional scream queen aura. However, Ellis believed that A.J. Cook's emotional vulnerability and strength resonated more with the audience. Her performance not only added emotional depth to the character, but also made Kimberly one of the most relatable and humanized survivors in the series. Death as a prophetic dance. In Final Destination 2, every death is not a random event, but the result of meticulously planted clues. Ellis excels in the art of foreshadowing, where every small detail and the placement of objects quietly hint at the inevitable arrival of death. The film frequently uses mirrors as symbolic imagery. Eugene sees his death reflected through an oxygen tube, while Kat's reflection in the car window foreshadows her impalement by a metal rod. These mirrors not only serve as direct death omens but also symbolize the inescapability of fate. Just as a mirror cannot alter reality, humans cannot change their predestined path. Domino effects and everyday triggers. Ellis is a master at turning mundane details into the triggers of death's domino effect. Rory's death is a perfect example. An ordinary cigarette ignites flammable gas, triggering a series of fatal reactions. Similarly, Evan's death involves boiling oil symbolizing danger, and a fallen magnet alters the course of the fire, ultimately turning a window into a deadly trap. This chain reaction death presentation puts the audience in a chilling butterfly effect experiment, making them feel the suffocating inevitability of fate. Kimberly Corman's character is not a traditional final girl in the usual sense. Her growth is not a simple journey from fear to bravery, but rather a profound deconstruction of the logic of death. At the beginning of the film, she is just an ordinary girl trying to escape death. However, as events unfold, she gradually realizes that death cannot be avoided. It can only be understood. Her turning point occurs when she decides to sacrifice herself by drowning to break the cycle of death. This moment is not just a confrontation between life and death, but also a philosophical reflection on rebirth through death. Only by confronting death can one attempt to take control of their destiny. Clear Rivers is the only survivor from the first Final Destination, but in Final Destination 2, she becomes more of a witness to fate, symbolizing humanity's helpless acknowledgement of the laws of death. Her character arc does not end with ultimate survival, but with a voluntary return to death, completing her own predestined cycle. Clear's death not only validates the notion that death spares no one, but also serves as a tragic symbol that knowledge cannot defeat fate. Even though she understands all the rules, she is still unable to change the final outcome. In Final Destination 2, Kimberly's sacrifice to break the chain of death has been interpreted by critics as a metaphor for the Christian model of redemption, where true rebirth is only possible through death and resurrection. The recurring motif of water in the film, drowning, floods, and waves from the car crash, symbolizes the intersection of death and rebirth, which echoes the symbolic meaning of baptism in Christianity. Structurally, the film mirrors ancient Greek tragedies, particularly the paradox of prophecy fulfilled. Just as Oedipus is destined to kill his father, Kimberly foresees death, but every attempt she makes to change her fate ironically becomes the catalyst that accelerates it. This is a classic example of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The harder one tries to change the future, the faster they are pushed toward an unavoidable end. The highway pile-up sequence is hailed as one of the most shocking death premonitions in the entire series. It's not just a sensory spectacle, but also a chilling manifestation of human fear of uncontrollable accidents. The director translates real-world driver fears, losing control at high speeds, chain explosions, and being trapped with no escape, into a visceral sense of anxiety, making the audience's hearts race with every tire slip and every tanker flip. Eugene's death, caused by an oxygen tank explosion, exemplifies the fusion of stillness and sudden chaos. Throughout the death sequence, everything appears quiet and harmless, lulling both the characters and the audience into a false sense of security. However, death ultimately strikes with an unexpected explosion, delivering a fatal blow. This narrative approach suggests that true fear often hides in moments of calm. Final Destination may second seem like a simple linear chase against death, but beneath the surface lies a complex structure of time paradoxes and reversals of fate. Director David R. Ellis draws from the psychological concept of avoidance exposure theory, where repeated instances of prophecy and fulfillment create a growing sense of anxiety that traps the audience in a cycle of inescapable fate. The film operates on two timelines, real-time events and the timeline of death prophecies. In real time, the characters continuously try to escape death, but the timeline of death prophecies precisely captures the key moments of each character's fate, making their escape the accelerator toward death. Kimberly's visions foretell death, but each attempt to avoid those fatal points unintentionally triggers the death chain, a chilling reminder that efforts to change the future often become the means of creating it, echoing the Oedipus effect in Greek tragedy. Eugene's dream of dying in an oxygen tank explosion is not prevented but ironically fulfilled through a series of coincidences, reinforcing the theme that fate cannot be altered. The greatest narrative innovation of Final Destination 2 lies in its reverse death chain structure. Unlike the first film, where death follows a linear sequence of harvesting one by one, the sequel boldly adopts a reverse order of death logic, breaking the constraints of linear time. This death in reverse approach follows the opposite order of the premonitions, adding an element of suspense while constructing a paradox of time looping, making it feel as though fate is playing a backward cat-and-mouse game with the characters. David R. Ellis, known in Hollywood for his expertise in visual effects and action sequences, showcases his signature style of intense visual impact plus intricate narrative design in Final Destination 2. From XXX, State of the Union, 2002, to Final Destination 2, Ellis demonstrates his mastery of high-speed pursuits and explosive sequences, transforming these spectacles into psychological explosions of anticipation. The audience is no longer merely watching stunt performances, they feel the impending threat of death in every detail. His combination of slow-motion close-ups and fast-paced editing creates death scenes that blend static suspense with dynamic shock, pulling the audience into a psychological tug-of-war. Compared to the first film, directed by James Wong, which leaned toward psychological horror and philosophical fatalism, Final Destination 2 shifts its style toward sensory anxiety and chain reactions, immersing the audience in an unrelenting death loop driven by physical death logic, delivering an impact far greater than its predecessor. The philosophical core of Final Destination 2, the inevitability of death, has sparked polarized interpretations in academic circles. Some critics view the film as a powerless indictment of fatalism, while others see it as an existential cry of defiance against fate. Fatalists argue that the film reinforces a bleak narrative of unchangeable fate through its self-fulfilling prophecy motif, where no matter how hard the characters try to escape death, their paths ultimately lead them back to a predetermined endpoint. On the other hand, advocates of free will see Kimberly's sacrifice as a symbolic challenge to the logic of death, representing humanity's ability to defy fate through self-agency. This existential spirit of resistance offers the audience a faint glimmer of hope in the face of death. Some scholars suggest that the movie sets death up as a chain reaction inevitability, making it essentially a moral experiment. When people know they are destined to die, will they choose self-sacrifice, or will they try to shift death onto others? The film offers no clear moral guidance when characters face life and death choices, and this moral ambiguity highlights the ethical dilemmas humans face in extreme situations. Kimberly's visions aren't just simple death warnings, they are a multi-layered visual code. The director uses a combination of quick flashes and abrupt sound changes to create a sense of future and reality colliding. This technique enhances audience immersion and makes the visions a core symbol of the time paradox. In the latter half of the film, when the order of death begins to reverse, this break from linear time introduces intense psychological tension. As viewers witness the characters' deaths, they can't help but wonder, can they escape this time? But the reverse order logic makes that hope feel brief and deadly, pushing the audience's psychological expectations to the brink. Final Destination 2 is more than just a thrilling horror film. It's a visual experiment in chain reaction theory. Through its portrayal of the butterfly effect and domino theory, the movie mirrors real-world disasters where unpredictable yet interconnected events unfold. The opening highway pile-up scene, hailed by many fans as one of the most shocking car crashes in film history, is chillingly echoed by real-life incidents. In the years following the movie's release, several eerily similar highway accidents occurred, some with strikingly similar details, like the 2007 California freeway pileup, involving over 100 vehicles, triggered by a single sudden brake, which set off an uncontrollable chain reaction resembling the film sequence. By introducing the concept of the death chain, the film exposes the core problem of systemic fragility. When one key point is triggered, the entire system can quickly collapse. Each death in the movie is caused by a seemingly minor oversight, mirroring real-life situations where small management errors can lead to irreversible disasters. Examples include medical errors, structural safety issues, and even financial crises, all of which reflect systemic chain reactions in reality. As a survivor, Kimberly carries the weight of survivor's guilt, spending the film trying to break the chain of death through self-sacrifice. This psychological state is common among real-life disaster survivors. For example, many 9/11 survivors experienced survivor's guilt and post-traumatic emotional rebuilding, a struggle that closely mirrors Kimberly's mental state. By portraying this survivor psychology, the film subtly reflects the difficult journey of emotional healing after a catastrophe. The success of Final Destination 2 not only solidified the franchise's status in the horror genre, but also sparked a global death prophecy cultural phenomenon. Whether on social media or short video platforms, Final Destination has become synonymous with unexpected chain reactions. When encountering dangerous situations in real life, many netizens joke this feels like a scene straight out of Final Destination. On platforms like YouTube and TikTok, the Final Destination challenge has emerged, turning the concept of disaster entertainment into a viral internet trend. Following Final Destination 2, many horror films began to adopt the chain reaction death mechanism, including Silent Hill and the Saw series. This physical death pathway setup no longer relies solely on a killer or supernatural force, but places the audience in a scenario where they feel trapped by an invisible force controlling death. Even major commercials have borrowed the butterfly effect plus domino theory logic. Honda's Rube Goldberg machine ad is a direct reflection of the Final Destination effect in the commercial world. For those intrigued by the death chain reaction and fatalistic reflections explored in Final Destination 2, several other films offer a similar experience. The Spanish sci-fi thriller Time Crimes 2007 delves into time paradoxes and self-destruction, while the classic horror sequel Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter 1984, builds on the concept of inevitable death by adding a fate reversal twist. Halle Berry's thriller The Call 2013 uses a race against time premise to create a similar countdown suspense. Death doesn't end, it just waits for us to slip. In the chilling conclusion of Final Destination 2, Kimberly believes she has broken the death chain through rebirth, but the final explosive shock silently reminds us, death's rules are inescapable, and trying to defy fate only pushes you closer to the inevitable end. If we reinterpret this iconic line, it's more than a summary of death's order. It's a commentary on humanity's futile attempt to control destiny. Death is merely the beginning of another cycle, and the threads of fate silently tighten when you think you've escaped. Hypothesis 1. What if Kimberly had never foreseen the highway accident? The movie's core revolves around premonition and change, but if Kimberly had never intervened, would those destined to die still meet their fates? This could have been a fate-accepting horror film instead of a fight to change destiny. Hypothesis 2. What if the death order had truly been broken? Each survivor is a pawn on destiny's chessboard, but if the order of death were completely reversed, could a parallel death universe emerge? Perhaps everyone could survive, but at the cost of world order collapsing, which might be the most terrifying ending of all.